Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We have got an unbelievable treat for you today. If you pay attention, you may even change the way in which you see the world today. We're here with Simon. Simon, I don't know a whole lot about your background, so would you be so kind as to please introduce yourself to the listening audience?
Yeah, thank you. I will. So my name is Simon. I have a background in molecular microbiology and was in the tract of like biology bachelor's, master's, and then doing a PhD and very, let's say, science focused. And during that process, I became more and more interested in more macro scale kind of things instead of the micro. So I got very much into philosophy and sort of system science and these kind of things. And for the past couple of years, I've been reading a lot on these subjects. I'm also a nature coach. I'm interested in coaching, helping people specifically cope with, for instance, climate anxiety, these kind of things. Um, and also I'm a big follower and interest in the psychedelic field. So both as a sort of first-hand user, but also from a scientific background and from a coaching background. So I guess that's a broad description.
That's it just goes to show why we have so much in common. I think that we have a lot of similar beliefs and we're both avid readers, and psychedelics are such an incredible movement right now. And I really love the way when one uses psychedelics, you can fundamentally change the way you see the world, whether it's through concepts or colors or ideas. I think it just brings to the forefront a new lens with which you can discern what's happening around you. And so Simon and I are here today. We got another friend, Ranga, that'll be jumping in shortly for those who know Ranga. And we wanted to talk a little bit about there's a fascinating author named Ian McGilchrist. He wrote a book called The Master and His Emissary. He's also wrote a new book called The Matter with Things. And it talks about the way we perceive the world, sort of the left brain, right brain. And the left brain is sort of this analytic scalpel that is there for us to break things down and get knowledge from. But it also forces us to see the world in like a mechanistic way, almost like like a machine, and like we provide meaning and that's what it is. And maybe it's sort of like the Jesus, God is a potter, like the ceramic model of the universe. And then we have this right part of the brain where we can see the concepts, we can see the irony, we can see some things like that. But I want to pass it off to Simon here too. Maybe you can help set up a little bit more on that little platform that I built.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I think that you already more or less set the stage. What I really like is McGilchrist uses this comparison often. He says the right hemisphere presence, so as in a verb, so the right hemisphere deals with whatever is present in the moment, and the left hemisphere re-presence, so represents, but it's also re-presence. So what the left hemisphere does is deal with cut pieces of information from the present and makes an image of that and analyzes the image. And it's also analysis, it's breaking up into smaller parts. It includes the word lysis, so it's breaking up. And so the left hemisphere, by definition, deals with not what is present, but is represented. So it has to make images of things, so concepts, language, literally like pictures. And this is also the place where we build well, large theories and different constructs and all these kind of things. And well, the right hemisphere does well virtually all the other things. Let's say so is in tune with the body, is in tune with the outside world, and a lot of the problems that I think what E. McGilchrist writes about in his book. I got it here.
Nice.
Um, he talks about the master and his emissary, talking about two hemispheres. And one is the master hemisphere, which is the right hemisphere, and the other is the emissary, the left hemisphere. And so in this comparison he uses, and he probably people should look him up. He's very good at explaining these things, but I'll attempt or make an attempt. Um, he uses the allegory of a so let's say there's a kingdom, and the king rules the kingdom, and he's a benevolent leader. He oversees everything, but as his kingdom is growing and growing, he cannot be everywhere at the same time. So then he appoints a right hand, an emissary, and he sends him off to really do the work in the field or on the location. But the king knows what's best for an entire kingdom, but the emissary knows for that specific spot where he is at, he will know in detail what is going on. And he says that in a right relationship, the emissary knows that the master has this overview. But in the worst case, and then he goes into this, the emissary sort of supplants the master and thinks he knows everything. But if you have then an emissary that only knows about the details in charge of a entire kingdom, then things go awry.
Yeah, that's really well put. I like that. And for those of us listening, think about the way the world is going right now. It kind of seems like we've gotten away from this master plan. It kind of seems, and you could break that down to an individual level. If you think about the way you maybe rationalize things, you look at how, well, I'm just doing this now because of this thing. It's like sometimes you can see yourself as that emissary, and instead of following what's true, what the bigger plan is, you get caught in the minutiae, you get caught in these little details like that. And so
Yeah.
I think it's also something that you can see, not only is it something that we're taught in popular science in schools and a lot of the popular people on the internet, but it just seems like this idea of mechanistic thinking is almost become like a plague. Like the emissary has gotten so big that it is trying to put the king away in the tower for a long time. And I think with these wars and the very short like attention span and this idea of us being ones and zeros and how we're kind of moving into this world of non-emotional sort of mechanism, like it just seems like cancer to me. What do you think, Simon?
Yeah, that's for sure. It's also the last chapter of the Master and the Emissary. He more or less starts it with what would the left hemisphere world look like, and then he takes about 50 pages describing our world. Um, and by now, so this book came out in 2008, and McGilchrist has been quite vocal already in several of his interviews, and now in his latest book, The Matter of Things, that we're living indeed in a world where the master has been supplanted by the emissary. And this is a big driver of this analytics-based world, and also this, like I just mentioned, and what he mentions in the book, is the left hemisphere deals with representation, so it deals with symbols, language, so never with the real thing. It deals with representation and abstraction of a thing. So it is also limited to thought, and thought never can capture the full truth, let's say, or the full reality. So we're living in a world, in a bureaucratic dream world, let's say. And the more and more we go into these, data-driven, science-driven, or data science-driven realities, I think the more and more we lose that sense of, reality, or the sense of aliveness, because that's also the case. The left hemisphere deals with images, and images are, in this case, are always dead. It's never the living thing. So the left hemisphere deals with dead things. And if we let that run our society, we're creating a dead society.
Yeah. It rings true in so many ways to me. And when I look at, I'm gonna bring this into like the psychedelic realm a little bit. Whenever I find myself on like a large dose of mushrooms or LSD or something like that, it's so amazing what happens if you just look up into the night sky or if you find yourself in your garden and you see like these trees breathing, or I remember a while back I was sitting out in my garden and I remember staring at like this I have this vine, and I was just so mesmerized by this flower that had bloomed on there. And you start thinking like, wow, that flower opens up at just the right angle to catch this maximum sunlight at like 4 p.m. Like, and you start thinking to yourself like, that's that's by design. And you start thinking, well, I wonder, what do I do things that are perfectly in balance with that? And like, it's unbelievable how you can begin to think in a way that is holistic instead of mechanistic. There doesn't need to be a formula that's like, okay, a squared plus b squared is c squared, and then we take all this stuff over here and then we apply meaning to it, and that's what it is. Like, that's a good way to explain it, but you're only explaining a fragment of it. And that gets us back to this representation of it. So me using that mathematical formula, or me using a formula like that, is me representing it in a way. But when I'm on a high dose of mushrooms, I'm taking in that information in such a different way, and it's I can understand it versus it being represented. I'm wondering, do you have like do you find it similar on psychedelics, or do you find yourself in situations like that?
Oh yeah, for sure. No, I think also I do a sort of microdosing practice, or
Right.
let's call it mini dosing. And I find it incredibly helpful together with mindfulness, with meditation, and these kind of things to really see where, for me, the emissaries having control instead of the master, let's say. So I'm more mindful, or when I'm mindful, I think less. And when I think more, I'm less mindful. And that's already like a very simple way of tuning in, like, okay, where am I at the moment? And with the psychedelic experience, yes, these frames that we use to capture things, or to look at things, these just drop, and then you start really seeing things, with a capital, I would say.
Yeah.
And it just talks to you differently. Like, reality unfolds differently, and you're seeing with more than just your eyes, I would say. And because you're dropping those frames, because that's also part of my journey, because my background is in like sort of reductionistic materialistic science, and very mechanistic, doing microbiology, genetics, and all these things. So it's difficult to find the wonder behind what you're actually studying. Is just like, you're studying live bacteria, and I was studying horizontal gene transfer, which is like mating between bacteria, so they give each other little genetic packages and all these kind of things. Like, it's even with it's not simple at all, but even with as simple of a flower, can already induce so much wonder.
Yeah.
Let alone on a molecular scale, whatever all this stuff is happening. And the analytical frame, so this emissary frame, really has a power of making it normal, or making it sort of now we're doing serious science, and all the joy goes out of it. So
like that's really interesting to me, and I'm glad you brought it up, because in some ways I think what McGilchrist is illustrating is this idea of bringing philosophy back into science. And I'm glad that you brought up the world of wonder, because how many kids, or I know myself, how many children or even adults that go to college, or I don't care if you're 60 right now, when you're learning something, how much of that wonder is just drained from the structure of learning, this beauty of it. It's just put into this dry area where we will go and learn how to do. It's just stripped out of there. But when you start realizing it on a bigger scale, and you start seeing the magic, the philosophy in it, the concepts of it, and you can use the whole brain, it seems to me, and I'm just using that loosely, like, it brings that magic back. I'm wondering, like, how much of that, when I look at schooling today, especially in the United States, it saddens me to see so many people graduating with these huge debts, and they go out into the world and they're not even able to apply what they learned. And maybe it's because of this analytical thinking. It's this, I don't know if that's the right definition, but am I making sense there? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And you'll really like the matter with things
I can't wait to
because
check it out.
McGilchrist goes into these kind of things. So he has a chapter called Institutional Science and Truth. And I was really enjoying reading that because I'm just finishing up on the PhD, and I was really frustrated with a lot of like how academic life is structured and papers and stuff. And he really goes into it. It's great. He, for instance, I get a small quote
Yeah.
about scientific articles. He's talking, to make it brief, he's talking about how scientific academic articles have become more and more unreadable in the last 20 to 30 years. While if you would read a scientific article from the beginning of last century, if you're reasonably educated, you can read it. So without a specialistic background. And then he goes into so how the situation is now. Increasingly, the heavily uh, acronymic jargon of research papers seems to me to present an almost impenetrable barrier to anyone other than the most highly specialized reader. And even then, if they are to get anything out of the exercise, they must have a huge capacity to tolerate boredom.
That's so true.
Yeah, and it is. So especially so he also goes into like biology, so the science of life, and that's literally what biology is. It's the science of life, and I'm a trained molecular biologist. And the first thing that we do when we study life is kill it. So we kill life and then we analyze it. So we break it up in pieces. So that already says more than enough for me. Like, what is the emissary's world? What does it look like? This analytical view, because it's lysis, so you have to break it up into parts. And what does this part do, and anatomize it? So it's really a shame that education under this paradigm is like this. And I think there is a movement to go more into a sort of holistic view or a different. It really needs a different worldview in order for us to get there. And I think what McGilchrist is doing is contributing to how to get there to this different worldview.
Yeah, I might even say pioneering the way, because I think
Mm,
so many people read that book and were like, it all makes sense now. Like,
mm,
it's, I've only spoken to you and maybe a couple other people personally, but I read some stuff on different forums and stuff, and you can see some really good analysis of the book. And some of the analysis is like, oh, after I read this, everything began to make more sense to me. Or after I read this, I begin to see things different. And, you know, I think that some of us have been on this mission where we've begun to see things different, but then when we read that, we're like, oh, that's what it is, And I
yeah,
I I can kind of see it in the world of science and education and all around us. I think it permeates it. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. This idea of specialization. Like, we've gotten
mm,
so specialized in medicine, in science, even in warehouses. Like, people have specialist jobs. And we've gotten so far away from each other. It's almost like we don't even speak the same language. Like, you got to go to a specialist for your foot. You have to go to a specialist if you want a certain little part made for a
yeah,
machine. And when you get that far specialized, it's almost as if the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and it's just back to the master and the emissary. You can
yeah,
see it everywhere once you begin looking at it.
yes, for sure, for sure. And that's a very good point. And I also want to get, you mentioned that before. Oh, hey,
Hello. Hi.
Aloha, Ranga.
hey, hey,
Hi, George. How are you?
I'm
I'm good.
fantastic. Ranga, have you met Simon before?
No, I've not met him before.
Simon, this is Ranga. Ranga, this is Simon.
Nice to meet
Now you
you.
have. Ranga, I'm going to fill you in just a little bit. We are going just, we're blowing up our minds right now. I'm so stoked you're here. Thank you for being here. We are
Thanks for
going into
having me.
this. We're going into the ideas of the way in which the left brain sees the world and the right brain sees the world. It's sort of like this dichotomy between specialization and seeing the world through psychedelics. You know how, like, when you see psychedelics, you see the plant bloom and the flower comes out at like a 45-degree angle to catch the 12 o'clock sun. It's like
Yeah.
this master plan thing. And we're talking about, like, why is it that in science today we don't allow the magic to be born? Simon brought up this point about how the first, if you're going to study life in a lab, the first thing you have to do is kill it. you know, and so I just wanted to kind of give you the breakdown right there. And then Simon was just about to fill us in on this idea of specialization a little bit.
Yeah, and about how the Master and Emissary is such a useful book in this case, because the frame that he that he brings and what you can incorporate for yourself is it works on a personal level, so you can use it as a means of studying the self, let's say, and it works on this larger scale in which you can see these bigger patterns of how the analytic worldview or how the left hemisphere is sort of a major guideline, but also corrupting most of our institutions, and how the way on society, how it's shaped, is making it more and more a sort of dead society. But on a personal note, I really found it incredibly useful to start thinking, or as a guide, to start thinking about my own thought content or the way on how I'm seeing things. So it's like, when is it clearly left hemispherical thinking and when it's more embodied right hemisphere, and to put a halt on it when it's clearly a lot of left hemispherical babbling.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna blow this up into the macro right now. So when we talk about left hemisphere and right hemisphere, you know, isn't it weird that we have like different hemispheres of the earth and we have different ideas about the East and Western religions? Ranga, I want to ask you this as someone who has been between, who has got to live firsthand in these different parts of the world and these different ideologies. Do you think that maybe the Eastern thought of spirituality is a more holistic look at spirituality versus the Western look at spirituality?
Yes. You know me, where I'll start with the answer for this part. It's just that whatever notions we have of the East, it's true of an outdated tradition, right? I just returned from India. I was there for a month. So whatever we talk about and we think about East, that is not currently the case, because they are approaching towards the Western mindset, right?
Yeah.
In a not a so relatively, I see that approaching the opposite side other than spirituality, because I feel like whatever we call the Western mindset doesn't have to be the Western people or a particular country. It's just having had, you know, good amount of resources and stuff, and being able to go from a developing nation to a fully developed nation, and what is left, what do you do, right? The question comes, and most of the things people do is accumulate materials, and this materialistic mindset is what I believe what people quote as West when I think about it. So right now, the eastern parts are approaching towards that, right? So whatever they add, they have lost. Even the meditation practices that they add, it's lost. I go to temples. It's more of a a forced ritual and a belief rather than the actual practice. But yes, if we go back to that particular time when these things originated, I'm sure the same things originated in this side also. The native people in the West would have add these traditions and rituals that add them one with the divine, which has not passed down when it was their lands were taken away from them, right? But on the eastern side, even though such occupations happened, it didn't completely get lost. They preserved these traditions, so that is the name for it. That's all. That's the difference I see. But coming back to your question, yes, there is there is can you repeat your question one more time with respect to what you want from the eastern thing?
Yeah, I think I was driving to the point of, and I'll add on to what you said while I say the question again. You know, it seems to me that the Western idea of spirituality is much more mechanistic and materialistic. And at least in my mind, the Eastern ideas of spirituality seem to be something that celebrated the entirety of it, not just a mechanistic look at it. So more of a humanistic, more of a collective sort of a, you don't come into this world, you come out of it. You know, it's a very complex idea of moving parts, and you're part of this huge thing and you're all there together. Where in the world of the Western mindset, it seems like you're a rugged individual and you like the ceramic model of the vertebrates. You're a potter. God made you, and you must enforce your will and build the world around you.
It's true. It's true. I have to disagree that these established concepts of how it is not actually helping at the individual level, right? Because for me,
Yeah.
even though I was born in India with these concepts that, even though they don't truly believe it, they kind of tell you there is no individual self, you're part of this one thing. There are stories like this that play to you, but you do not have this realization within you, right? And you do not have the practices that go along with it. So for me, when I came to the West, this whatever you called as forcing the idea towards rugged individualism, that is what led me to that. Because the opportunity to be your own individual is the opportunity to also ask, like, what am I, without assuming it. Of course, like most times we just assume that I am this or that, but if you're able to have the area where, yeah, you are an individual and you get to do whatever you want. So you stay in a room, locked up in a room, you ask the question. So that was a gateway for me to realizing that. So in that way, right, like I think the thing what Simon is talking about also, it's kind of, one is not better than the other, or one is not, how do you say, it's all time based. It's like the waves moving across the water, right? You close your eyes and see the waves somewhere else. It's always changing. It's moving from here to there to here to there, and sometimes one is better than the other based on what time you're at, and collectively it might be a bad thing to be caught up in a society, and being an individual might be a better thing, and sometimes being an individual might be stupid. You might get stoned and you might be hanged on the board. So it depends on the time you're born in.
That's it. Simon, what do you think about that? What would you add to that?
Nice. No, I really like those points you bring up, Ranga, and it also feels very, very true in that sense. That the specifically what you mentioned about even though if you grow up in a culture that is sort of rich with a sort of collectivist tradition, or not collectivist, that's the wrong word, but a more holistic tradition. It's not enough that the language is there, or the cultural background is there. It's also, it should be incorporated in daily life. So the rituals should be there. And then if you explain like, okay, and then you go, you work in the West, or you live in the West, we have all the rituals that enforce our worldview, which is how we structure our life, which is work, just the whole thing. So all the rituals and the action that goes with it are there. And and it's more easy, let's say, while for this more holistic or this more integral worldview, let's say that embodied experience, to do that you need quiet, you need the time to reflect, spend time in nature, in community. You need all these way more, by now, more difficult to obtain things. So I found it interesting. And also, to get back on the point that you mentioned in the end, it's indeed, these are two extremes, and that's also what McGilchrist goes in his book, because it sounds like the left hemisphere is the bad hemisphere. Well, actually, it's about the balance between the two, because they're both vital. Almost any animal has this specialization, is a lateralization of the two hemispheres.
Good point.
And it has a super important function, because this narrow, this scalpel, as you put it, way of seeing things is also incredibly necessary to have, because then we can discern things. It's just that if that is the major way of seeing things, then it starts hampering with being able to see the large picture. And if we then create a society where we focus on being experts in things but not generalists, we start to lose the big picture, and who's then left to see the big picture anyway. So those are just some things that popped in my head.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that this is what education is lacking. it seems to me that in schools, like we've already spoken about the left and the right and Eastern and Western, it seems like people, when they go to learn something, they learn one way or the other way. They learn to be analytical or they learn to be conceptual. But I like what you said, Simon. Like in schools, we should be teaching exactly what you said. Hey, we think in our mind, we have this way to analyze things, and then this other way to conceptualize, or we can use both parts of our brain. We can use the scalpel and we can use the magnifying glass over here. And what we should do, we should be teaching kids, yes, like ask a question like, what do you see here? And they could point out, well, I see a dead cat. Okay, why is the cat dead? And then we could be teaching people how to use both hemispheres of their brain in conjunction with each other, instead of just analyzing it, instead of just being the artist. We should be teaching people how to use both sides and integrate it. And it kind of seems like that's where we're moving to. But I don't see any schools teaching that particular idea of paying attention. I guess you could break it down to paying attention, right? Do you pay attention in this way, or do you pay attention in this way? Ranga, could you think of some ways we could integrate this type of thinking into like an exercise?
Before, we can talk about that. When you mentioned school, it was funny. I just saw a meme, right, of how education is kind of outdated in this aspect. And, in schools, they ask you to write detailed essays for 5 pages, right? And in the real world, you convince me in 7 seconds or you lose me. Right? You do not have the real skills that, you always think there is always time to write 5 pages. That's not it. So, yeah, we gotta find a balance between that. Coming back to practice, I do not know a practice that because for me anything that is given from outside is gonna become an enforcement, right? So it's like this. I think the older people, like the older generation, the books that got transmitted, right, the knowledge in that, most of it points towards the fact that you cannot clearly tell them to go straight, so you got to guide them, around the horizon. They can't look straight at the target, so you point them a little off the center and just hope they'll reach there. It's that's how I see it, because the moment you tell them this is where they should go, there is an innate rebelliousness in each one of us, right? And I don't think we'll do it. So anything that talks about balance cannot come during the school days. I think having that extremities and letting them fight that out for themselves is something, it's naturally gonna happen. But as Simon was saying, I agree that the Western side also has its set of rituals that going to work and consumption style and so on. But what one thing could be different, what Simon said was like that space to be self-reflective, right? I think that's the thing we can start incorporate slowly everywhere. Have that space, right? We're not revisiting the term boredom enough, right? I truly believe there is nothing boring in this world. So I think growing up, kids should start having that more, like having that space to revisit that and see it for themselves. There is nothing boring about it. Once they have it, I think that's the opposite of paying attention, right? Boredom, because you're distracted somewhere. So after that, you're gonna pay attention to whatever that is, and then you can point to whatever, and you can see that they'll be pointing attention, and yeah.
It is. Simon, what do you think?
Nice. I like that a lot. I'm also thinking about that's part of quiet contemplation. I think that's one of the biggest luxuries we can have in modern life. We all have like an attention draining device. Most of us have. It's like a parasite, and getting to the space where you're actually bored is becoming rare, because watching YouTube or whatever social media feeds you have, that is a sort of patch on boredom. So you're actually bored, but you're getting filled. While just sitting in contemplation or sitting outside, or it doesn't matter, and allowing yourself to be bored, that's the best inducer of actual creativity or of insight, or of you might surprise yourself with interesting thoughts, or you might notice a type of bird you've never seen before. Or, oh, look how beautiful the grass is. whatever. So I really like that point. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And it brings me to this idea of consumption versus contemplation. You know, you talk about when you're bored and you're watching YouTube, you're consuming versus contemplating. And it seems that in a consumer capitalism, in a consumer society, like there's such a pull, there is such a large amount of money that's and people that are vying for your attention. It's like the uninterrupted presence of the visual that's just constantly, Ranga, Simon, come here, look at this. Hey, look at this thing. Look over there. Look at that. Look at that. Look at this. You know, and there's no time. There's no time to be like, what the hell is that bird doing? What is it eating? You know, or like, is that a caterpillar on that leaf? Or what kind of plant is this? You know, or what are these ants doing? You know, like there's no more of that because there's billboards and there's a half naked, super hot chick on your phone right now. And she might be saying your name. You don't know. Did she say my name? I'm not sure. But, you know, it's just this incredible pull for your attention. And I think that this is leading us back into this short-term ideology that Ranga was talking about, like this 7-second clip of boom, 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 boom. So I'm wondering, Ranga or Simon, what this idea of consumerism and consumption, is this something that is kind of making us less contemplative? What do you think, Ranga?
100%, I think. Because my first time for questioning happened right after my university in Canada, right? One of the great things that happened was I didn't have money to waste on. So I graduated. Did I cut?
Yeah, kind of cut right there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. So right after my master's, I didn't want to find a job in my field, so I wanted to take time off and figure what I wanted to do. So because of that, I was doing gig jobs that just paid me rent and food, and I did not have the money to spend on other things, because I for the first time realized I don't need much other than food and rent, and add a dog and food for him, which was not at all a big deal. It was this chunk of money. But because I was living with roommates who were in this high paying job, there is this sense of am I missing out, right? But I couldn't push myself to get the high paying job either. So I was got in this frustrated point in life where I want to do that, but I'm unable to do that. But that's when I was able to ask, like, but why do I need to buy it? Right? I have to go out of my way to do a lot of things to buy it. But that contemplation happened without me realizing, oh, I'm giving this space and time to think about it. I was suffering at that point, right? I was depressed with how my life was going. But the actual question that was happening was, wait, if I don't need it, why should I buy it? Right? So yes, it was exactly the opposite side of consumption, I would say. Right? Once you stop consuming, you actually wonder, should I even be consuming it at the first place? Right? There was another thing on the terms of this, like what I saw was we are so busy that with the idea that if we could do it, we are not asking the question if we should. Right? I just saw that quote last week and it made a lot of sense. Yeah, we're doing a bunch of stuff, but yeah, we are capable of that. But is it necessary? We'll never know, because once it's done, it's we'll see. Yep, totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
I think I get that. Yeah, and I like the point that the situation you more or less created for yourself that induced a lot of friction. This friction allowed you to actually start asking these questions. So without that friction, it would have been more difficult to ask these questions. So, well, that turned out well, I guess.
As Ranga says, suffering is grace.
Yes.
Yeah, it's suffering is almost a clarity too. Like there's a clarity that comes from suffering that you wouldn't have unless you went through those times. You know, one thing that I wanted to ask you, Ranga, is there's a lot of people that probably want to do what you did. Like you got your master's, you had this whole world in front of you, and then you're like, yeah, I think I'm going to do this other thing for a little while. I think there's a lot of courage in there, and I think that there's a lot of truth in there, and I think that there's a lot of critical thinking that needed to be done for you to do that. Like what kind of process was that like? Was there a shift in your thinking that got you to that spot? Was there one thing that made you go, okay, well, I'm thinking this is what it's supposed to do, but I'm going to do this. Does that make sense? Kind of.
Yeah,
Did you
it
hear?
does. The answer starts with cannabis. So
Nice.
most people who asked me at that point, when I was sad and I didn't want to do this, they said, cannabis is the reason, it's spoiling you, you should drop it, right? And I was guilty about consuming cannabis at the time when I was doing it, because what cannabis did to me was show a state of mind, a happiness that wasn't tied to things, not to situations or outcomes and stuff, right? It is a borderline psychedelic, and I've not been introduced to psychedelics yet at this point, right? So, but having known that there is a state of happiness that is not tied to things in life, it actually gave me a chance to question. So I was pretty content after having a joint, right? I was content. I was literally content, and there wasn't anything I was trying to do. And that was the part. So why should I do it? I'm going to live for my happiness, right? So what cannabis showed me was my happiness lied within me. But because before that, it was all about that, oh, these set of things that should happen on the outside for me to be happy, right? And I realized, including my therapist at that point and other people at that point who were asking me to wean off cannabis, were just they had the same thing, and they were afraid. They stopped. It stopped them from living their conceptual life, right? And now they have to take steps, and cannabis is the barrier in their path, right? But what if I don't want to go that side? What if I just turn a little bit to where these drugs are showing me, right? And it wasn't a bad. And most times I've realized people who are very hard on drugs, they're mostly either not, they've not tried it, or it has taken them to a space where they're uncomfortable. And the moment we are uncomfortable, we tend to see it as a bad thing, and come back to the space of comfort. But this is where, again, same as suffering, a lot of uncomfortableness inside the head is a good thing. It's helping you.
It's so true.
Yes.
Yeah. Simon, what do you like? We talk a lot about suffering. Me and Ranga always get into this idea of suffering, and so too do a lot of people that have gone through a psychedelic adventure. Or, I think anybody who is reading Ian McGilchrist has probably gone through some suffering themselves. So, what's your take on suffering? And do you want to share any things that maybe have happened that have changed the way you thought about the world you live in or see?
Nice, good question. Yeah, I guess during when my PhD contract ended, and then I really had to get into the writing of it. During that time, there was this nagging feeling in which I was getting more and more anxious about the state of the world and these kind of things. So instead of focusing my time on writing my own thesis, I spent a lot of time reading up on climate systems, on biodiversity collapse, on societal collapse, these kind of things. And that was sort of a way of rapidly deconstructing my worldview, in the sense like, okay, I had the idea of I was going in science, it was making sense. I'm going to do something useful, biology, blah blah. And then I got this picture of like, oh no, the world is doing something completely different, and it's also looking worse and worse. It's way worse than I thought, and I'm by nature a pessimist, so it was worse and worse. So that kind of got me into this spiral in which I had to really let go of my worldview and sort of grieve for my own worldview, but also on the same side, really allow sort of ecological grieving to occur. I really feel deeply for that. And around that time, I just started reading a lot of different things, because when your worldview collapses, then you're also open to a lot of new ways of seeing things. Well, one of these authors is Ian McGilchrist, that helps, matched with also practices. So doing psychedelics, daily meditations, going for long nature hikes. And I was lucky in that point of time in my life It was also during lockdowns and all these kind of things. But I was lucky that I had a lot of free time for myself. And so I could actually spend all this time doing these more holistic things and really, coming to a new way of being. And that also completely changes your priorities. So from that point, I also went to do like a coaching education. I got more serious into sort of psychedelics as therapeutics, but also as means of supporting people who are in the similar types of processes, as in really feeling from the inside like, no, the world is different than I see it, but not still knowing how to be in that world. So being in the process of transition. So yeah, for sure. And suffering really helps because that gets you to that place, and from that place you can start building. So yes.
That's so awesome. It reminds me, it's so fascinating to me that a lot of the people I talk to have gone through something similar, which is this collapse of their worldview. And there's a couple of things that I have learned that come out of this. And one of them is it's necessary. In fact, it's mandatory. Like it must happen in order for you to be reborn as the person you are today. And as painful as it can be, probably the more painful the collapse, the more you can learn. And when you're ready, you will. And so if I could give one note on this first part to anybody that finds themselves going through a tragedy right now, I would say congratulations. I'm so stoked for you. I'm so stoked this tragedy is happening to you. And I'm not trying to be callous. I'm trying to be caring because it's the best thing that's ever happened to you. And it's going to be glorious. The second part is what an incredible worldview grows out of that collapse is not only this new world anew, but your ability to see people that are in that collapse and to help them. You know, like you said, you've begun to go and help these other people through different sorts of, whether it's a psychedelic practice or a nature coach or getting out and helping. It's almost like once this collapse happens to you, now all of a sudden you're adorned with the badge of helpfulness where you can, or you have these new glasses that you can see through this lens of that happened to me. And it just expands on this idea of us growing together the same way mycelium grows in the ground and looks for other people to connect to. So too do we do that. And like just as above, so below, it seems to me. And it just gets back to this idea of this destruction of specialization that I think is its own sort of worldview collapse. And it's so fascinating me to, like, I'm talking to you guys and you've had similar experiences. You're in similar pathways. And even though I've never met either one of you face to face, I feel like we have so much in common. It's such an awesome time to get to talk to you guys. What do you see this happening more and more to people? Like, is there more and more people beginning to have their own collapse so that the world can be reborn? Is this a bigger process that's happening all over the world? What do you think?
I can be really brief about it, and then I'll give the space to Ranga to talk
please.
about it. But there are more and more reports about increases in general anxiety disorders, depression, burnout, these kind of things. And I think these are all incredibly healthy responses of a body responding to a toxic system. Yeah. And recently, so there's been a report in the Netherlands where about 1/4 of the people that participate in this survey have some sort of psychiatric disorder linked to these kind of things. So yes, I see more and more people that are going through this, and I see statistically there are more and more people that are gearing themselves up for a transition, meaning getting into depression and burnout. So yes.
What do you think, Ranga?
So Simon, did you say that your transition happened during COVID? You were saying something about the lockdown, right? Was it?
Yeah, just before. So I was already, so in the late 2019, I had my sort of, that it really just fell. And then, so the lockdowns and stuff didn't hurt me too bad because I was already in a cocoon, let's say.
It's, yes, that thing, George, you know, we need more of that lockdown. It is true because of COVID, especially like in Canada, they said there was a 30 to 50% increase in the cases that were reported, with mental health problems, and it's true. The lesser the distractions, the more we can be honest with ourselves. The more these this way I see it is these emotions are the body's way of communicating with us, right? It doesn't have to be the truth all the time. It's communicating with us, and we need to be there to listen to it. So most times we are lost, as Simon was saying. We keep going through the feeds and stuff. We are inherently sad, and we're just hoping it will go away with quite enough number of swipes. 18 videos is the goal. Once I'm done 18, I think I'll be happy now, right? And so they keep suppressing these things, and once the distraction is cut, and that quite happened in COVID. Like most times in the beginning, so friends I knew, they were like, oh man, I don't know when it's gonna end, right? And I it didn't affect me, because as I said, I didn't have money to spend. And when they got closed, I only had like, you guys are in the same boat as mine. You have the money, but you can't spend it anywhere, right? Online shopping went up, but not physically going to places, any kind of distractions, right? So they had to sit at their house, and finally have the chance to confront. And it's also the thing that once we change our perception, once our uh, whatever view that our parents give collapses, and we are you know turning towards a new direction, we meet like-minded people. So I don't know if it
Yeah.
has increased, the number has increased or something objectively, but subjectively, yes, it is going to be. We are heading towards a meditation center instead of a strip club. So of course we're going to see more Buddhas than I don't know what. So it's kind of like that. So subjectively, yes, I do feel like the people I meet, it's amazing. I I have never thought about crossing paths with any of you too. I wouldn't have thought about it. Like I'd be thinking I have to go to this office, meet people based on concepts that I had. I would limit myself to people
Yeah.
that I think I should meet. Right? That's a prison. That's what I was having a discussion with my friend who said he wanted to be more socializing more. Is it the moment you said that out, right? You're gonna socialize more. That's you're not gonna do that. You're gonna let go of that idea that I need to go and find people, and it just serves you with people that you need in your life right now. It even
Mm.
happened in my flight trip, like coming back, and we the guy in my next seat, he was from Amsterdam, so he's had psychedelics, and he's been in meditation. He went to India and to travel for 2 months, and it was cute. He picked up a couple of words in my mother tongue, and I was like, nice. And then we spent almost. I sleep during the flight usually, and we talked for 6 hours. And me in my older mindset wouldn't have imagined that to happen, right?
Mm.
And yeah, it's nice that way.
Yeah, very nice.
That is amazing. It brings up this other idea that as you were speaking about mindset and, worldview and changing, I've found myself, I would say after COVID, maybe a little bit before, like just understanding and man, like I've learned that if you tell yourself a different story, then you can see the world differently. And it sounds kind of like silly, but it's so profound to me. I remember like just beginning to I had this thing happen to me one time where like these cops, they came to my door and I was at work and they came to my door and my mother-in-law and my wife were home. And so I'm working and like my phone starts ringing like just off the hook. Like it rings and I hang up. It rings and hangs up like 10 times. And I'm like, oh, this must be an emergency. But I didn't recognize the number, so I didn't pick it up. And then after the 10th time, my wife called me and I picked it up and she's like, George, is there something you want to tell me? And I'm like, I love you. And I'm like, I can tell you this, that someone's blowing up my phone. They've called me like 10 times in a row. She goes, yeah, a bunch of cops just came to the door and they said that you've done some things that are really bad and they need to talk to you. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? She goes, yeah, here's their card. And she read off the card and they were like from like the FBI. And I'm like, what the hell? And so as I'm talking to my wife, the guy calls. Like I see that other line that was calling me. I'm like, all right, these people are calling me. I love you, gorgeous. I'm gonna answer this phone. So I pick it up. I'm like, this is George. And he's like, George, this is Special Agent Johnson. It wasn't Johnson, but it was making that up. Special Agent so and so from the FBI. I need to see you immediately. And I drive a truck for a living, and so I'm like, well, I'm out on my route right now. He's like, how about I come to your work in the morning? And I'm like, that's a horrible idea. You should definitely not come to my work. How about you meet me? I'm like, why don't you meet me now? I'm over here at UH on campus. And he's like, okay, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And like, I'm automatically racking my brain. I'm like, dude, what have I done? Have I done something? I'm automatically guilty in my mind, right? And these people were pounding on my door and they're blowing up my phone. And I'm like, oh man, do these guys know I smoke weed? Damn it. I'm like, they don't care if I smoke weed. That's nothing. I'm like, well, I bought a lot of these Ted Kaczynski books. I wonder if they think I'm like a serial killer or something, you know? And I'm like, nah, they don't care about that. And I just couldn't rack my brain. Like I've done some things, but nothing worth the FBI coming to my door. But I'm still automatically guilty in my mind. And so I park my truck and they meet me in their car and they jump out and they have this little folder with them. And they come out and they're like, Mr. Monty? I'm like, yep. I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, we want you to take a look at these photos and tell us if you know this person. And so I'm looking through these photos and it was some guy I had never seen in my life. Some hillbilly with like a mullet. And I'm thinking like, what the fuck is this? And then I started thinking, did they just give me some fake photos to look at so they can look at me? Like, you know, I'm going through all these things in my mind of like, what could be happening? So I'm looking through and I peer up to look at them and I look through and I fold it back and I'm like, I have no idea who any of these people are. And the guy's like, well, then would you want to guess how this person has your identification card? And I'm like, what the fuck? And I just stared at him for a minute. And I'm like, yeah, I got pickpocketed at the mall about 3 months ago. And then like, I just saw all the air deflate on this guy. He went, you know, and I'm like, and if you don't believe me, you can go check out the security cameras because they have it on camera. And I tried to get my ID back from the mall, but the cops said they couldn't give it back to me. And I felt all vindicated, like, yeah, I didn't do anything wrong. But here's where the cerebral part kicked in. I thought about that all day. Like that was so crazy. I'm like, these guys thought that I was like some international criminal or something. They thought I was like this guy that was doing crazy things. And then the other part of my brain clicked, like, I could have just lied to those guys. Maybe I did lie to those guys. And I started telling myself this other version of me, like, dude, I could be. Those guys are from the FBI and they thought I was an international mastermind. I could be. I'm probably smarter than those guys. I went down this crazy rabbit hole of what I could be. And then I started thinking, I wonder what crimes I would do if I was an international mastermind. Would probably be some sort of crazy money laundering scheme or something, you know? And I just made up this incredible story about myself, like what I could have been. And I believed it for a little bit. Like I just let myself run with it and I believed it. I'm like, I have millions of dollars if I was that guy. And like, it sounds so crazy, but it fundamentally changed the way I saw myself because after that, it's like I gained this ability to envision myself as something else. And I've been able to use that same visualization and that actual believing that I could be this. And I was like, you know what? I could be a podcast. I could be this. I'm so much more than a truck driver. But in a way, it was a collapse of my worldview. It was a collapse of this identity that I had. And out of that became the birthing of an imagination where I could see myself in any way, shape, or form. So I think that there's something to be said about visualizing, and it's an amazing way. I forgot how I freaking got on this point, but I think it was a version of mechanistic thinking versus the ability to imagine, the ability to see yourself after you've collapsed your worldview, that you can be anything. You can go out and help stuff right there. So I'm not sure exactly how I got on that tangent, but it was really fun to tell that story.
You said stories are based on how we change stories, the stories we tell ourselves, it could be different.
Yes.
Yeah, and I can also imagine the sort of paranoia that sets in the moment that they call you. And that's what you mentioned, is that you already picture yourself as guilty.
Yes.
I think a lot of people, if you ever been on an airport, I really hate airports because with what's called border security. What is the name? Yeah, well, whatever. The guys that check all your luggage and stuff.
Yes.
You immediately feel like, okay, I'm carrying something that is not allowed. So you start sweating and shit. And
yeah.
Like you're doing actually something wrong. And that's indeed a way of the brain just telling you things. And you're convincing yourself that it's the case.
Now is this there seems to be this fear that we live under. That is this the society that we live in that relates back to the mechanistic thinking? Maybe this is what forces us to think so analytically, is this idea that we're always guilty. Hey, you got the wrong size water bottle. Hey, you're not wearing the right thing over here. Like, it seems like there's always this layer of security, even though it's invisible. It changes the way we think.
It might have something to do with it because I before I read Master and the Emissary, I was reading a bit of like French philosophy, like Baudrillard and like things about hyperreality. And hyperreality fits perfect on the Master and his Emissary. I'm if someone is listening, I'm looking forward to see a Baudrillard scholar read Ian McGilchrist and see if someone can synthesize the two, because what he talks about is if we start living in a world that's more and more shaped by the map that we have in our heads. So this is also what McGilchrist is talking about. So the left hemisphere creates maps, and the territory is seen by the right hemisphere. Territory being physical reality. We create a map. What the left hemisphere does, if the territory doesn't fit with the map, it changes the territory instead of changing the map.
Yeah.
And so we're living one part of the Anthropocene, which isn't a nice term, but the world shaped by man, is we are living in a world that is a representation or is physically the map that we have in our left hemisphere placed on reality. So a city is a virtual space, but an airport is as virtual as you can be, because it's here's a set of rules that you have to carry around, and all these different types of artificial things that you're not allowed to carry. So yes, it is a part of that part of our brain. So all these different non-natural things that we have to construct concepts for languages and how they interrelate. We have to carry that around, which is completely virtual. So yeah.
That's fascinating. Ranga, what do you want to say about that? I see you smiling over there. What are you thinking?
You said airports, right? I think I just had all that being done on me 8 times, I think, different flights, right? And it's I understand why they do it, but it's also, it's very funnily crazy, right? Like they try too hard to. I'm sure like there would have been bad stuff happening that they need to instill this measures, but I think I have had points where I've had a fear-based looking at life, and once I started changing that internally to a place of, I don't know, maybe in that aspect, a place of apathy, like not caring towards what these fear is telling me, because 99% of the time that what my fear has responded to me was based on some conceptual game that was put in by someone else. It wasn't based on like, oh, there is fire, I shouldn't put my hand. I'm not talking about those kind of fear, right? It's more so with respect to concepts. So you shouldn't be this way, you shouldn't do things this way, you shouldn't carry this. And so I stopped having a fear-based response rather than I don't care until something bad happens. Like you want to do anything, it's fine. Right? And I see that, we kind of imagine things to be worse than how they are. And once I stopped imagining things on this front, I felt like, man, what a mental illness I got. I keep thinking about things that, never happened, right? Like there's so much that is happening and I keep imagining, and I think it was draining for me at the beginning, and then now it's more like I couldn't go back to that old self of like picturing how could it be, like whatever it could be, let it be.
Yeah, that's it. It takes a lot of mental energy, and I know I'm guilty of it all the time. Like, and maybe this is the analytical part of the brain where, you just start dissecting and dissecting and dissecting. Like, what if this happened? And what if that happened? And if this happened, then that would happen. And it's easy to go down that chain of events. And it's almost like when you take a chicken and put its beak on the chalk line, it's stuck there. So too do you get in a mode of thinking where you can get stuck if you find yourself in that sort of rabbit hole. I got to turn my computer back on. Excuse me for a second. There we go. Yeah. So it's fascinating to think about the way you think. I love what you said about the map and the territory. It's especially as someone who is out on the road all day. There's a lot of people that will come to me and say, "Look, you can go right here on this map." And I'm like, "I can't." And they're like, "The map says you can do this. Look right here on the map, George. Go right on this road." And I'm like, "That road was closed 2 years ago." Oh, and it just gives you the idea of we don't update our maps, and the map is not the territory. There's tons of stories about people that my dad told me a story how he went on this motorcycle ride and they had this old map and they got to this place where a tree had fallen down over this thing and half the people got stuck because they're like, well, I guess we have to turn around because they had this old map and they couldn't figure out how to go around it, but and maybe that's an idea of maybe when your map is destroyed, that's an opportunity for you to explore the territory. Maybe more people need to have bad maps.
Yes, you have to become aware that your map is faulty. And in this sense,
Thank you.
the word map you can use as worldview. I have a very nice quote from Gilchrist from his new book, and it's at the end of part one. And I think this summarizes more or less the importance of what you just explained. It's very short. He says, in the modern Western world, we are constantly crashing and puzzled as to why, constantly faced with paradoxical outcomes to our actions. What particle physicist and quantum theorist David Bohm called sustained incoherence. We often find that we strive for something and achieve its precise opposite. Why is that? I suggest it is because our current dominant model of reality is mistaken. As a result, we badly need to rethink. And
Beautiful.
that more or less summarizes perfectly what the book is about, but also what I innately sensed. And that's why at a certain point you need to, let's say you're lost. He also uses this analogy, which I really like. Let's say you're a ship captain and you have to navigate a coral reef or a difficult mangrove forest. And you have two potential ways of seeing things. One being a map, and the other being your eyes and sitting on the spot where you're at. But that will not tell you where your final destination is. And he says, if you only have access to one of those, which one would you use? And that's a very easy conclusion. It's like, yeah, I would use my actual eyes because then you can navigate without crashing. But if we continue using the map in the situation where we're in, also as a people, as a global society, we're gonna be crashing, and we're already crashing into a lot of different boundaries because we are not using our eyes. We're using our faulty map, which we should discard.
Yeah, that is well put. Especially when you have like 5 people using different maps. Like, like we all have these different maps. Like, we're all trying to get to the same spot using these silly. I don't know. Maybe maybe it's all necessary. Maybe this is the collapse we need to see in order to be born again and work through this thing. And that's what makes me hopeful. Like, as much destruction is out there, I think that there can only be rebirth. And just like a regular birth is painful, and just like a regular birth, there's a real chance a child dies in childbirth, right?
Yeah.
So too is there a real chance that there is a huge tragedy that happens before us. And I think people are right to be aware, are right to be skeptical, are right to be alarmed. Like, this is a rebirth, and it's a chance for a miracle, but it's also a chance for destruction. And I think that what McGilchrist is pointing out is a path that can at least begin to awaken people to some areas we've gone wrong. And if we can focus on those ideas, we can at least begin to see with our eyes instead of looking at these faulty maps.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And a big problem is indeed five different maps. Well, I would say I like the analogy. That's also why Baudrillard is interesting with the hyper reality, because he says that at a certain point you have such a high saturation of signs and symbols in which it replaces the actual territory that's under it. And as we're going through sort of the 21st century, and we're physically replacing the physical real with our images of the real, So we're turning any wild space, we're turning into a managed space. Well, I live in the Netherlands. The entirety of the Netherlands is mapped and managed. Also, nature, let's say. You get to this space where, Baudrillard calls it hyperreal, that the physical real disappears, because the physical reality, or what was before that reality, that's we supplanted with our strange models of different symbols and words that don't map to anything anymore. And so instead of 5 guys with different maps, we have 7 billion people with different maps. And we have internet, which also is exacerbating or accelerating the generation of new maps, or the specialization of these maps. So you get, and also you have convergence. So it's not all bad, but for me it was also, like you mentioned, like, is there a positive note here? I think McGilchrist also uses this. If you push long enough to one direction, you end up becoming the complete opposite of the thing that you're attempting to do. And I kind of hope that, or if I have some hope on this sort of the hyperreal state and the postmodern condition, is that if we go further and further into this accelerated madness of all these different maps, then faster and faster people will figure out, like, okay, this is not working at all. They'll crash, and then get to the position where they start opening their eyes, and then let's use the meme, like, touch grass. Then you start making sense together again, and then we can actually start seeing the reality without one of these artificial maps. So.
Yeah, that's really well put. I like that idea of pushing through to the other side and getting past this idea of one side automatically. If you go far enough out on the right, you end up on the left, right? It's almost like a magnet how it goes around, and like I forgot what they call that, but yeah, it's fascinating to think about that as the world in which we live. I wonder, like, how much is virtual? Would you consider virtual reality to be a map?
As in like Oculus, that kind of stuff?
Or even absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's probably like another deepening of this sort of left hemispherical way of creating
More immersive.
Creating maps.
The prison is even deeper to escape out of.
Yeah, it's like Plato's cave, and then so you I stand in the sunlight, but it's you got the Oculus Rift on. It's the artificial sunlight. So shit, it's not our cave.
That's what Mark Zuckerberg should have called Meta Plato's cave. Like
Plato's cave 2.0.
Isn't it interesting that they tried to bring out this world of virtual reality and it just failed? Like that's exactly what you just spoke about when you talked about how we're moving faster into everybody having these maps and then everybody crashing. Like, here's people that invested billions of dollars into this augmented reality and it just failed. Like, that's a sign of, like, hey, this doesn't work. Maybe we should be moving away from this.
Why do you say it failed?
I'm sorry?
Why do you say it failed?
Well, I think that they had put, I think that on a recent interview, they had talked about moving away from the metaverse. Not that Meta as Facebook failed, but their idea of the metaverse, as if, this idea of how crypto was supposed to go in, and you could sell these digital covers, and you could have a digital store that sold widgets to characters in gaming universes. I don't know a whole lot about it, but I did read quite a bit about, like, the world of people buying virtual property in virtual games, and you could sell virtual food to virtual people and sell them virtual weapons. Like in some ways, it's so imaginative and beautiful and fantastic, but in other ways, it's just it's nothing, And I don't know that how long you can live in a world of nothing. So I think that's what I was trying to say by it failed. What do you think, that maybe it hasn't failed?
I think it's just a temporary setback, but I think it will grow stronger. And as you see it, right, like right now, as we are going forward into the future, I don't see the world as a very fair place. It's like it's a very survival of the fittest kind of thing. Here, it's not about physical strength. It's about more of a mental game and what you're born into and what you're born with, and with money being, the currency instead of being love. So because of that, it's a very unfair place to exist. And going forward, people have two options. They could either play the game or distract themselves, right? And playing the game is pretty much, I think, is going into the trap, or abstain from action. But abstaining from action, I do not see happening anytime soon. It's going to take a lot of time, lot of suffering to get ourselves from abstaining into this, superficial thing they have created, so-called reality, right? So in that sense, people will first choose distraction over actual suffering. So any kind of distraction is going to be awesome. It doesn't matter, you're able to identify that, as much as cool it could be to sell virtual things to virtual people and so on, for some people it is the reality they live in. That's it, right? And there are different dimensions of reality, and they would rather do that than live here and suffer. So I could get myself, because the brain is amazing. It just wants to keep living. It has no other purpose than to live. Life is just running towards more life, multiplicity, and it doesn't have any objective goal, or it doesn't work towards happiness. It doesn't work towards anything. It just needs to survive. So, oh yeah, if I get trapped myself in virtual reality, I could stay alive for 10 more years. Yeah, I'm gonna choose that, because in the real world I might die because of sadness, not actually, but whatever idea we have, or the egoic self dies. So I would rather choose this path, which is, the illusionary happiness. But if I see it as a very positive thing, because if we can get more people to see that way, right, this virtual reality is illusion, it could also translate to most of the real world suffering, right? It might. That's how I see it. Like, once we have a perception towards uh, a lower dimension of reality, where we are able to observe that, oh, it's an illusion. Why are you getting yourself caught into this, right? Maybe it might be a gateway to realizing, wait, am I caught in one of those, right? Maybe it all works, in the unfolding of time. No, that's my way of seeing karma. I've tried to, one thing you asked me, being born in Eastern thing, they, have this concept of karma a lot. But so again, with 7 billion people and 7 billion maps, 7 billion different definitions was there for karma. And most of it is like, oh, karma is like, you do good, good comes to you. You do bad, bad comes to you. And it's the most fundamental mistake in understanding karma. But I cannot explain what karma is, but the natural unfolding of, when you're able to open your eyes, right? Like, you can never ask someone to open their eyes. If they're not ready for it, they're not ready for it. They finish that set of sequences where they're like, oh, wait, I can't repeat this loop one more time, right? And that path. So in that sense, I think it can happen. People, we had people to 1 year back sell NFTs, right? It's just a greater fool theory, and it's just that I can find one more fool and get money out of him. That's the only idea. It has no inherent value. I never saw a point in digital art. Like digital music, I see the thing, but digital art, it never made sense to me. Like, if you could copy something, right? Why would you own it? Like, what is the term of owning it? There is no. It's crap. I do not simply see owning something. I don't know how that works, but these non-fungible tokens have this identity that makes it original. Original by who? Who is saying that? If I call it fake, does it become fake? This thing is based on a story that I just believe there is one more fool who believes it too deeply, right? For him, NFT is going to be the religion. Once he does that, I can sell it off to him. So we are living in a world where that is happening. So VR is, I have a Quest 2 at home. I don't use it much, but I find it very immersive. I find it also helpful in so many things. Like, I see it playing a role in mental health for sure, right? Like, there are so many there was one study. It wasn't with much data set, but it said that VR could take people into the borderline psychedelic mindset. And I definitely think if enough people come together and work towards such a product, it's completely deliverable, right? It was really immersive. When I was there, like I used it to play table tennis, and I really didn't have to go anywhere else. And 20 minutes into the game, I'm sweating, and I have the mic connected to that guy. It doesn't matter where he is, and I saw the beautiful thing behind it. I didn't see it as a very evil thing, right? Um, but I could also see going into what you said, like staying there, buying virtual stuff and selling it virtually, and the question comes, what's the point, right? Eventually, if it comes to our life to ask what's the point, it'll be nice.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you say that. Like I could see sometimes when I think about virtual reality from that point of view, it just brings about the absurdity of my life. Like it's really, you know what I mean? Like I can sit here and talk about, look, this guy's selling a fictional product to a fictional thing. But then I look at my life and I'm like, okay, I'm just driving this truck and delivering these products to people that don't really need them. You know what I mean? It's kind of the way of seeing the world. It's kind of the way, no matter if you see your world in the virtual life or you see the virtual life in your world, like it's a great way to see the absurdity of life. It's funny.
The absurdity of modern life. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's maps on maps on maps. And
yeah.
So the that's indeed also what I got from Ranga, what you were talking about and what you just said, is you could picture it as a good thing, even if you picture the technology in a moralistic view, as in it's evil, or there are ways of looking at this. Then more of it will clearly make it more and more prominent in everyday life, which will offer the chance for more and more people to really crash with it, and then have like an opening, a potential moment of opening happen, where they can build up this other worldview, where they can connect with themselves in a different way, or start seeing sort of the revolutionary potential or whatever. So, yeah.
Oh, it makes me want to, like, in some ways, this may be dark, but it kind of want to make, like, when I look at it from that level, you can almost see the positive aspect of, like, just wanting to force people into a crash. I know it's the wrong way to do it, but, like, you could see how people are like, yeah, I'm helping out by crashing this thing. You know?
Yeah, I read a bit, and I think this is like the corner of accelerationism, all this type of philosophy. I was reading somewhat into it, and I kind of understand, but I kind of gave up on sort of top-down political any means of doing things. So yeah, it's fun to think about. It's fun to find argumentation about, but I'm not in a position to accelerate anything, so I might as well not pay any attention to these kind of things. So
yeah, gentlemen, I have to tell you, this is really, really fun for me, and I really enjoy these conversations. And it's unfortunate that I have to go live the absurdity of becoming a truck driver at Christmas time right now. But I gotta check out. And this is really fun though. I if it wasn't for conversations like this, I would feel empty in a lot of ways. So I want to say thank you to both of you for coming in and talking and helping me get through my day, and allowing me to express some ideas that I have, and enlightening me with some of the ideas that you have. And I think we'll be back again. And I really like this format of us three people coming together and just amplifying each other's ideas and meeting new people. And it's really, really rewarding. And it's some of the best things I do in my life, is getting to meet and talk to people. So, but before we go, Simon, what do you got coming up? Where can people find you, and what are you excited about?
Ooh, well, what I've got coming up for my personal life is I'm trying to finish my dissertation, and once that's done, then I'm moving forward to other things. I'm excited about what am I excited about? Yeah, a lot of things actually. I'm excited about exploring more my coaching business, also incorporating more with the psychedelic microdosing and these kind of things. Luckily, I'm in the Netherlands, so it's legal. So these kind of things I'm doing, so that's nice. And also in the future, I'm potentially going to see if I can find a way to incorporate like the McGilchrist type of work and match that with education. So to, let's say, bring life back into life sciences. That's the thing. So yes.
That is amazing. I think that's a beautiful maxim right there. And I hope, what is your dissertation on, if you don't mind me asking?
Horizontal gene transfer in lactic acid bacteria, so in Lactococcus lactis. Very specialized, very specific. So
Yeah.
Are you going to bring some life back into that particular field? Is that like?
No. I think my time in the lab is over.
Fascinating. Ranga, where can people find you? What do you got coming up, and what are you excited about, my friend?
I like Judge, even though I give simply no answer to that question. I like you're sportive enough to ask that. Whatever we were talking about, life is absurdly pointless, and I'm gonna go back to becoming a couch potato. But I'm there on LinkedIn with these fun thoughts. Yes.
Nice. What Simon, Ranga has a podcast, and it would not surprise me the least if you end up on his podcast in the next few weeks here. So for me, what I got coming up, I have a let me see, Sunday I am meeting with a few people, and we are going to talk about spiritual reality versus virtual reality. And I want to thank both of you, because I'm going to be able to incorporate a lot of what we talked about into that particular talk on this coming Sunday.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, and it's going to be a good time. And I got some other great podcasts coming up. I'm interviewing a gentleman that has written a rebuttal to Sam Harris's book about the argument against free will.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's going to be a really interesting topic. Yeah, that's what you can find me here on the True Life podcast. And that's what we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed Simon and Ranga and myself. We really enjoyed the conversation. Reach out to everybody. And gentlemen, stay on the line for a minute. I'm going to hang up here, but I wanted to talk to you briefly afterwards. So, ladies and gentlemen, Thank you for joining the True Life podcast. Aloha.